On a quiet summer day in June 1996, an elderly couple was enjoying a peaceful fishing trip near Russellville, Arkansas, until their line snagged something horrifying. At first, they thought it was just debris, but when they reeled it in, they made a discovery straight out of a horror movie: a shoe with part of a human leg still inside. Panicked, they cut the line and rushed for help, setting off a massive search of the bayou. By the end of the day, authorities had pulled multiple body parts from the water, each one weighed down with rocks, wrapped in plastic, and sealed with duct tape. This wasn't just a random crime, it was a calculated, cold-hearted execution. It didn't take long for investigators to ID the victims, William and Nancy Mueller, and their 8-year-old daughter, Sarah.
It was bad for Bill and Nancy to have to die the way they did. But for a 7-year-old girl to die that way, to be wrapped with plastic, to be wrapped with duct tape, to have a 60-pound rock strapped to her body and thrown into a lake, there was no excuse.
The family had been missing for months, but now their disappearance had turned into a gruesome murder investigation, one that would unravel a terrifying story of white supremacist extremism, paranoia, and pure evil. But to better understand how everything happened, let's start at the beginning. 52-year-old William Mueller, living in a small, tight-knit community in Tilly, Arkansas, with his wife Nancy and stepdaughter Sarah, whom he loved as his own. William was a gun dealer and collector who was deeply passionate about firearms. His love for buying, selling, and trading guns became a family affair, and they often traveled together to gun shows on the weekends. Because of his business, their home was always packed with firearms, ammunition, and a large stash of cash, making them an easy target for robbery. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened in February 1995. Their house was broken into, and the thieves made off with the guns, ammo, and cash. William suspected that his friend and neighbor Kirby Kehoe was behind it and confronted him, leading to the end of their friendship. But despite the loss, William continued his business and didn't let the robbery slow him down. Now, fast forward to January 1996, the Mueller family was attending a gun show in Springdale, Arkansas, completely unaware of the nightmare that awaited them back home. On January 11th, after returning from the show, they were ambushed by 2 men dressed as FBI agents. The men tied up William, Nancy, and Sarah, demanding to know where they kept their cash, guns, and ammunition. When William refused to cooperate, things took a terrifying turn. The intruders separated the family and tortured them for information, and heartbreakingly, they didn't even spare little Sarah. They shocked her with an electric cattle prod until she finally gave in and told them where to find the money. Can you imagine the kind of monster you'd have to be to do this to a defenseless little girl? And even after getting $50,000 in cash along with guns and ammunition, you'd think the criminals would leave this family alone. But they didn't. They had something else in mind, something extremely horrifying. First, they used a stun gun on each family member, knocking them unconscious. But that wasn't enough. They then placed plastic bags over their heads, sealing them with duct tape and suffocating them to death. After the murders, the killers loaded the Muellers' bodies into their vehicle, drove to the Illinois bayou, tied rocks to them, and dumped them into the fast-moving water, trying to erase any evidence of their horrific crime. At first, no one really thought much of the family's disappearance. Days passed, and people assumed that they had just gone off the grid for a bit or would turn up soon. But then days turned into weeks, and there was still no sign of them. After 2 weeks, Nancy's mother, Arlene Branch, started to worry. Something felt off, so she went to find the sheriff and reported them missing. That's when an investigation kicked off, but the detectives were hitting dead ends. No one had any idea where the Muellers had gone. The last time anyone saw them was on January 11th when they left the gun show in Springdale. After that, it was as if they had vanished into thin air. Then, exactly a month later on February 11th, things took a chilling turn. A farmer came across the Muellers' Jeep abandoned on the side of a highway, miles from their home. Inside, they found Nancy's purse with her wallet and ID still inside, but the family was still nowhere to be found. This discovery sent investigators into overdrive, fearing the worst. But as weeks turned into months, they still had no real answers, until 5 months later when the gruesome discovery was made. It was clear from the start that this wasn't just any murder, it was an execution One investigator later recalled the horrifying scene.
The torso had a rock attached to it. There was a lot of tape on it. The head had a bag of some type on it, duct tape around the head. Very disturbing to us because it was obvious, that this was a different type of thing than we typically deal with. It was an obvious execution. It was just some cold-hearted people.
Forensics experts examined the duct tape and found tiny flecks of blue paint. When they ran it through a database, they discovered it came from a blue General Motors vehicle. This gave detectives a major break. They now knew that at least 2 people were involved. One must have driven the blue car carrying the bodies, while the other followed behind in the Mueller's Jeep before abandoning it. By the time the bodies were dumped in the bayou, the family had likely already been dead, suffocated by the plastic bags. Investigators then turned their attention back to the Mueller's belongings. Since their disappearance, most of their valuables had been claimed by relatives, but some items had been left behind in their landlord's garage. Among those items was a Colt .45 gun case with its serial number still intact. But the gun itself was missing. Even more chilling, they found a family photo of William and Sarah standing next to 2 unknown men. Hoping for a lead, the team ran the gun's serial number through the National Crime Information Center database. And just like that, bingo! The weapon had been traced to a man named Travis Brake, who had been arrested months earlier in Seattle, Washington for carrying a concealed weapon. When questioned, Brake admitted he had bought the handgun at a gun show. He described the 2 men who sold it to him, and in a shocking twist, identified one of them as one of the unknown men in the photograph with William and Sarah. Detectives took the picture around town in Arkansas, asking if anyone recognized the man. Eventually, they got an answer. The suspect was none other than William's neighbor and former friend Kirby Kehoe, the same man William had suspected of robbing him a year earlier. Kirby Kehoe wasn't just any small-time criminal. He was already on the FBI's radar for his ties to extremist, anti-government, and white supremacist groups. He had a criminal record and a reputation that stretched far beyond Arkansas, but investigators still needed solid proof before they could make an arrest. Nearly a year after the Mueller's murder, they finally got a break, this time in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. A state trooper spotted a blue Chevy Suburban parked illegally in a handicap spot. Something about the bumper stickers on the vehicle raised suspicion, so the officer decided to investigate. Inside, he found a man named Sean Haynes and his pregnant girlfriend sound asleep in the car. The trooper ran the serial numbers on the 2 guns Haynes had in the vehicle, and that's when things took a turn. One of the weapons, a stolen AR-15 rifle, had originally belonged to the Muellers. After being arrested and questioned, Haynes confessed that he had traded another firearm for the rifle at a Washington motel 6 months earlier, and the person that he traded with, a 26-year-old named Chevy Kehoe. Chevy Kehoe was the eldest of Kirby and Gloria Kehoe's 8 sons, named after his father's favorite brand, Chevrolet. As a kid, Chevy seemed bright and full of potential. He was even an honor student at Colville Junior High School. But in 1988, his parents pulled him out and decided to homeschool him. They claimed it was to give him a more focused education, but in reality, they were raising him in an environment filled with radical and hateful ideologies. Instead of math and science, Chevy was taught robbery, theft, and how to evade the police. The Kehoe household wasn't just a home, it was a breeding ground for hate and paranoia. Anti-government rhetoric was their everyday language, and Chevy absorbed every bit of it. He didn't just have big dreams, his dreams were dangerous, and fueled by white supremacy. By the time he was a young man, Chevy had one goal: to overthrow the US government and create his own white supremacist utopia, which he called the Aryan People's Republic. Chevy's twisted vision led him down a dark and violent path. In 1995, he was involved in a brutal kidnapping and robbery. That June, he and a partner targeted Malcolm and Jill Friedman, a Jewish couple who owned a store where Chevy had once worked. The Friedmans were held at gunpoint not because they were random victims, but because of their ethnicity. This was a hate-fueled attack, a direct reflection of the toxic ideology Chevy had been raised on. Despite his growing list of crimes, Chevy and his father always seemed to slip through the cracks, avoiding avoiding capture time and time again. But their luck ran out on February 15th, 1997. A state trooper pulled over a blue Chevy Suburban for driving too slowly and erratically. When he ran the plates, he found out that they were expired, and both the driver and passenger did not have any IDs. Something felt off, so the officer asked the driver to step out of the car. The man complied, but made it very clear he didn't want to be touched. And then things took a terrifying turn. As a deputy called for a tow truck to impound the vehicle, the driver suddenly bolted back toward the car. Officers chased after him, trying to stop him. But then, out of nowhere, the guy in the passenger seat pulled out a gun and started firing at the cops. The chaos gave the driver just enough time to jump back into the Suburban and speed off.
It was just after 1:30 when the officer pulled over the blue Chevy Suburban with Washington state plates for a traffic violation. Neither man in the vehicle could produce ID, so the officer asked the driver to step out of the car. The man told the officer he borrowed the truck from a friend. He then refused to a pat-down search. Listen as the officer attempts to search the man for weapons.
Any guns, knives, clubs, stuff like that on here, sir?
I don't want to go in and searching through all my stuff.
I'm not searching through your stuff, sir. I'm going to put you in my car.
That's just fine, but
Now, do you have any guns, knives, clubs, and stuff like that on you? Very good.
Listen, sir, I don't want no problems.
I'm not going to give you any problems, sir.
Apparently, he did want problems. A few more minutes went by. Then the man ran back to his car in an attempt to get away. The passenger then opened fire on the police.
Watch him! Go! Please!
As the passenger ran into the woods, the driver sped away. Amazingly, no one was injured in this exchange.
Turns out the two men in this wild standoff were Chevy Kehoe and his younger brother, Cheyene Kehoe. As Chevy took off in the Suburban, Cheyenne made a run for it into the woods. Officers spent the entire day searching for him, but unsurprisingly, he managed to slip away. Meanwhile, Chevy wasn't done causing havoc. Later that day, he was involved in another this time in an electric supply company parking lot, with two Wilmington police officers, Officer Richard Rick Wood and Sergeant Robert Bob Martin. During this second shootout, a random passerby, 56-year-old Frank Marsden, who was just going about his business, was hit in the shoulder. The entire dramatic chase and shootout were caught on police dashboard cameras and became a media sensation. Footage of the shootout first aired in 1997 on Fox's World's Scariest Police Shootouts and has since been featured on shows like The Most Shocking and World's Most Amazing Videos.
Hopefully what will happen is from these films and from these cameras that somebody out there may be able to help us identify them.
After escaping the cops, Chevy and Cheyene Kehoe went into hiding, moving secretly from state to state with their families before eventually settling on a ranch in Utah. For a while, they kept a low profile, working for a local ranch owner in exchange for room and board. But that didn't last long. Chevy's temper started flaring and his paranoia spiraled out of control. At one point, he even talked about killing his own wife, Karina, because of her Native American ancestry. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, he also plotted to murder his own parents, Kirby and Gloria, so he could raise his younger brothers under his twisted white supremacist ideology. Then, on June 12, 1997, things reached a boiling point. After a violent argument, Chevy turned his paranoia against his own brother, and Cheyenne feared for his life. Not wanting to wait around to see what his brother would do next, he stole Chevy's pickup truck and took off. By June 16th, Cheyenne had made it to Washington, where he walked into a police station and turned himself in. And he didn't just surrender, he spilled everything about what the Kehoe family had been up to. But the biggest bombshell? He named Chevy as one of the men involved in the brutal murder of the Mueller family. Then there was the truck. When Cheyenne stole it, it had been repainted white, but investigators quickly discovered that it had originally been blue, just like the paint flecks found on the duct tape used to suffocate the Muellers. With this damning evidence, Chevy was arrested the very next day and hit with racketeering, murder, murder, and robbery charges. He pleaded not guilty and was held on bond, but his arrest was just the start of the Kehoe family's downfall. Later that same month, their father, Kirby Kehoe, was also taken into custody. But the real shocker came almost a year later, when their mother, Gloria Kehoe, came forward with some disturbing confessions. She told investigators that Chevy had admitted to her in detail how he murdered the Mueller family. And according to her, this wasn't just some random act of violence. It had been planned for over a year. It all traced back to the first robbery of the Muellers in February 1995. Apparently, when William Mueller confronted Kirby about the break-in, he said some pretty disrespectful things, which, let's be real, makes sense considering Kirby had literally just robbed him. But in Chevy's twisted mind, disrespecting his father was an unforgivable crime. And in his world, the only punishment for that? Death. This wasn't the only motive, though. Investigators believed Chevy had another reason for targeting the Muellers. Their massive collection of expensive firearms, high-end gear, and ammunition, he wanted it all. And Chevy wasn't working alone. That's when Gloria Kehoe dropped another bombshell. She revealed the name of the second man involved in the Mueller family murders, Daniel Lewis Lee. Just like Chevy, Lee had a dark and violent past. His childhood was filled with instability, seizures, and neurological issues that led to multiple stints in mental health facilities. But he never stayed long because of his violent outbursts. As he got older, that rage only got worse. By the time he was 17, he was already involved in a brutal murder during a robbery, the killing of Joey Wavra. This was his third murder in a string of violent crimes, but somehow he managed to avoid a murder charge. Instead, he got off with a suspended sentence for robbery, a slap on the wrist that only fueled his violent streak. It wasn't long before Lee crossed paths with Chevy Kehoe in 1995, and the two hit it off immediately. They shared a deep hatred for the government and a sick dream of creating a white supremacist empire. Together, they hatched a plan to rob and kill the Mueller family, and most importantly, to cover their tracks, so neither of them or Kirby would be linked to the crime. According to Gloria, January 11th, 1996 was the day they put their plan into action. While the Muellers were away at a gun show, Chevy and Lee dressed up as FBI agents and waited for them to return. When the family got home, they sprung their trap, ambushed them and tying them up. But there was one part of the plan that didn't go as expected. Gloria revealed that Daniel Lee hesitated. When it came time to kill Sarah, the young girl, he froze. Even with all of his violent tendencies, he wasn't comfortable murdering a child. But Chevy, he had no hesitation and killed the girl without a second thought. And here's where things take an unexpected turn. Now, you'd think that since Chevy was the mastermind behind the brutal crime, he'd get the harshest punishment, right? Wrong. In March 1999, both Daniel Lee and Chevy Kehoe went to trial for triple murder. And guess who testified against them? Cheyene and Gloria Kehoe. Both men were found guilty, but when it came to sentencing, things got weird. Chevy got 3 life sentences, while Daniel Lee was sentenced to death. Lee spent 21 years on death row before finally being executed by lethal injection in 2020. Even in his final moments, he maintained that he wasn't the one who killed Sarah.
First time in 17 years, a federal prison inmate was executed this morning. Daniel Lewis Lee received a lethal injection in Indiana after the U.S. Supreme Court allowed the execution to proceed. He was convicted of murdering 3 members of an Arkansas family back in 1996, including an 8-year-old girl. Lee told witnesses this morning, though, that he didn't do it. The High Court, with conservative justices in the majority, voted 5-4 overnight to reverse the lower court rulings. Those courts had been concerned with what they called an unconstitutional risk of pain when it comes to lethal injection.
A lot of people were shocked by the sentencing. How did Chevy, the clear ringleader, get off with life, while Lee was sentenced to death? But wait, it gets even crazier. Chevy was even linked to the Oklahoma City bombing. That's right, the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history, which killed 168 people and injured over 700, might have had a connection to Chevy. And guess who dropped that bombshell? His own brother, Cheyene. Not long after he was sentenced for his role in the shootout, Cheyene claimed Chevy knew about the bombing before it happened. Then a motel manager in Spokane came forward with some eerie details. According to the manager at the Shadow Motel, Chevy was seen with Timothy McVeigh, the convicted Oklahoma City bomber, 4 to 6 months before the attack. And get this, the manager also claimed that on the morning of the bombing, Chevy rushed into the motel office, asked them to turn on CNN, and became ecstatic when the news of the explosion broke. Even more chilling, in the days leading up to April 19th, Chevy allegedly told the manager that something big was about to happen. Now here's where things get tricky. Chevy denied everything, and when the FBI investigated, they couldn't find any solid proof linking him directly to the attack. But given his extremist ideology and deep ties to violent groups, the speculation never fully went away. But what do you think? Did Chevy get off way too easy after everything he did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you thought this story was insane, just wait until you see what you've got coming next. In the meantime, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update.